scholars have spoken at the Sham Sharabi Memorial Lecture, and I believe today's speaker is no exception to the rule. Dr. John Mearsheimer, which many of us in this room and in this community know for his work on the question of the special relationship with Israel and the Israel lobby, and the co-authoring of a controversial and best-selling book on the issue, has long been an established name in political science and international relations theory well before he entered into the question of the Israel lobby. He is perhaps the most identifiable figure in realist thought in international relations, and has been a prolific writer in international relations theory, authoring a number of books and a number of articles. Undoubtedly, it is from this foundation of realist thinking that he and his co-author questioned the role of the United States' involvement in attacking Iraq, and ultimately concluded that it was the role of domestic politics, which realists do not often look at, that did in fact explain this outlier and explained why the United States went to war. The title of today's Hisham Sharabi Memorial Lecture is "The Future of Palestine, Righteous Jews versus the New Afrikaners," and please join me in welcoming our lecturer, Dr. John Mearsheimer.
It's a great honor to be here at the Palestine Center to give the Sharabi Memorial Lecture. I would like to thank Yusuf Menayer, the Executive Director of the Jerusalem Fund, for inviting me, and all of you for coming out this afternoon to hear me speak. My topic is the future of Palestine, and by that I mean the future of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, or what was long ago called Mandatory Palestine. As you all know, that land is now broken into two parts: Israel proper, or what is sometimes called Green Line Israel, and the occupied territories, which include the West Bank and Gaza. In essence, my talk is about the future relationship between Israel and the occupied territories. Of course, I am not just talking about the fate of those lands. I am also talking about the future of the people who live there. I'm talking about the future of the Jews and Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, as well as Palestinians who live in the occupied territories. The story I will tell is straightforward. Contrary to the wishes of the Obama administration and most Americans, to include many American Jews, Israel is not going to allow the Palestinians to have a viable state of their own in Gaza and the West Bank. Regrettably, the two-state solution is now a fantasy. Instead, those territories will be incorporated into a greater Israel, which will be an apartheid state, bearing a marked resemblance to white-ruled South Africa. Nevertheless, a Jewish apartheid state is not politically viable over the long term. In the end, it will become a democratically binational state, whose politics will be dominated by its Palestinian citizens. In other words, it will cease being a Jewish state, which will mean the end of the Zionist dream. Let me explain how I reached these conclusions. Given present circumstances, there are four possible futures for Palestine. The outcome that gets the most attention these days is the two-state solution, which was described in broad outline by President Clinton in late December 2000. It would obviously involve creating a Palestinian state living side by side with Israel. To be viable, that Palestinian state would have to control 95% or more of the West Bank and all of Gaza. There would also have to be territorial swaps to compensate the Palestinians for those small pieces of West Bank territory that Israel got to keep in the final agreement. East Jerusalem would be the capital of the new Palestinian state. The Clinton parameters envisioned certain restrictions on the new state's military capabilities, but it would control the water beneath it, the airspace above it, and its own borders, to include the Jordan River Valley. There are three possible alternatives to a two-state solution, all of which involve creating a greater Israel, an Israel that effectively controls the West Bank and Gaza. In the first scenario, Greater Israel would become a democratic binational state in which Palestinians and Jews enjoy equal political rights. This solution has been suggested by a handful of Jews and a growing number of Palestinians. However, it would mean abandoning the original Zionist vision of a Jewish state, since the Palestinians would eventually outnumber the Jews in Greater Israel. Second, Israel could expel most of the Palestinians from Greater Israel, thereby preserving its Jewish character through an overt act of ethnic cleansing. This is what happened in 1948 when the Zionists drove roughly 700,000 Palestinians out of the territory that became the new state of Israel, and then prevented them from returning to their homes. Following the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel expelled between 100,000 and 260,000 Palestinians from the newly conquered West Bank and drove 80,000 Syrians from the Golan Heights. The scale of expulsion, however, would have to be even greater this time, because there are about 5.5 million Palestinians living between the Jordan and the Mediterranean. The final alternative to a two-state solution is some form of apartheid, whereby Israel increases its control over the occupied territories, but allows the Palestinians to exercise limited autonomy in a set of disconnected and economically crippled enclaves. It seems clear to me that the best of these alternative futures is the two-state solution. This is not to say that it's an ideal solution, because it is not, but it is by far the best outcome for both the Israelis and the Palestinians, as well as the United States. This is why the Obama administration is intensely committed to pushing it. Nevertheless, the Palestinians are not going to get their own state anytime soon. They are instead going to end up living in an apartheid state dominated by Israeli Jews. The main reason that a two-state solution is no longer a serious option is that most Israelis are opposed to making the sacrifices that would be necessary to create a viable Palestinian state. And there is little reason to expect them to have an epiphany on this issue. For starters, there are now about 480,000 settlers in the occupied territories, and a huge infrastructure of connector and bypass roads, not to mention settlements. Much of that infrastructure and large numbers of those settlers would have to be removed to create a Palestinian state. Many of those settlers, however, would fiercely resist any attempt to roll back the settlement enterprise. Earlier this month, Haaretz reported that a Hebrew University poll found that 21% of the settlers believe that, quote, all means must be employed to resist the evacuation of most West Bank settlements, including the use of arms. In addition, the study found that 54% of those 480,000 settlers do not recognize the government's authority to evacuate settlements, and even if there was a referendum sanctioning a withdrawal, 36% of the settlers said they would not accept it. Those settlers, however, do not have to worry